The sun had barely risen when Lieutenant Emma Carter's transport rumbled across the cracked tarmac of Fort Redstone, one of the U.S. military's most remote bases. Dust swirled in the early morning light, clinging to the edges of her uniform and streaking her cheeks. She stepped down carefully from the vehicle, her boots scuffing against the concrete, the rhythmic clank of her gear announcing her arrival to anyone paying attention. Most were too busy with their own routines to notice her, yet a few curious eyes followed the small-town girl with the dirt-smudged hands and calm, assessing gaze. Emma had come from a quiet farm in Iowa. Her life had revolved around tending crops, repairing old machinery, and rising before dawn to feed livestock. It was a life of rhythm and resilience, of solving problems without manuals or handbooks. She had learned to work hard, think fast, and keep calm under pressure, but those skills had rarely drawn attention outside the farm. Here, in a place built for warriors, she knew she would have to prove herself all over again. The soldiers on the tarmac noticed her immediately. She didn't stride with the confidence of those born and bred for the military. She didn't carry herself with the swagger that marked those who had spent years on bases, under fire, and in drills. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose, scanning the sprawling complex, noting the layout of barracks, the line of vehicles, and the distant training grounds. Some chuckled as they whispered to one another. "She's just a farm girl," one private murmured, glancing back at her with a smirk. The words hadn't even crossed General Harrison's mind yet, but when he did see her, he laughed out loud. The sound boomed across the tarmac, drawing the attention of several nearby recruits. "A farm girl," he said, shaking his head as he leaned against the hood of a jeep. "Let's see how long she lasts." His voice carried authority and a touch of amusement, but it also held an edge. He didn't just joke, he tested, he observed, he challenged. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. Words had never mattered to her. Her life on the farm had taught her that actions, not talk, revealed true skill. She adjusted the strap of her pack, breathed in the sharp morning air, and began walking toward the command center, each step deliberate, each movement measured. The soldiers watching snickered quietly, imagining her fumbling in drills, getting lost in the maze of buildings, or dropping her gear during basic exercises. They had no idea how dangerous underestimation could be. Inside the base, the din of machinery, distant explosions, and shouted orders created a chaotic rhythm that would overwhelm most new recruits. But Emma moved through it with her senses alert. She noted every gap in the barricades, every uneven corner of the training yard, the positions of surveillance cameras, and even small signs of mechanical wear on the vehicles parked along the perimeter. Everything mattered. Her mind cataloged each detail with precision, like she had learned to do when fixing broken tractors or patching fence lines back home. As she passed a group of soldiers attempting to lift a heavy crate into a vehicle, she noticed the chains had been poorly secured. Without a word, she adjusted them, securing the load correctly in mere seconds. A few soldiers glanced her way, some with surprise, others with skepticism. General Harrison had been observing from a distance, a notebook in hand, recording anomalies, strengths, weaknesses. His gaze shifted to Emma as she finished securing the crate, brushing her hands clean on her uniform. He frowned slightly. Not that he acknowledged it openly. He never did, but she had caught his attention. The laughter that had escaped his mouth earlier faded into thoughtful silence. Emma continued to walk, moving past the rows of vehicles, drills, and training grounds. She watched soldiers attempting to operate complex machinery, noting minor errors. A lever pulled in the wrong sequence, a valve left open, a misaligned sensor. Each small observation planted a seed of understanding about the base's inner workings, weaknesses, and potential threats. No one else noticed. They were too busy trying to impress, to prove themselves, to shout orders. In the barracks, new recruits were milling about, some unpacking, some trading stories, some pretending they belonged. A few of the more seasoned soldiers made whispered jokes, commenting on Emma's farm upbringing, the quiet way she carried herself, and her calloused hands. "She's going to break her first week," one said, a young corporal smirking, thinking himself clever. Emma heard nothing. She had long ago learned to ignore laughter that didn't matter to focus on what did. And in that focus, she felt the subtle shift that always came before the storm, a sense of anticipation, the kind that whispered of challenges she had yet to face and victories she might claim. By mid-morning, she had made her rounds, quietly observing drills, checking mechanical systems, and noting the layout of defensive positions. She caught a pattern in the way soldiers reacted to commands, a rhythm to the base's operations that no one else seemed to notice. And though General Harrison didn't show it, the notebook in his hand now held more than casual notes. It held questions, curiosity, and a hint of unease. Because even before she spoke a word, Emma Carter had begun to demonstrate that this farm girl might not be as ordinary as everyone assumed. Her calm, her observation, her precise actions, tiny and unnoticed though they seemed, were planting the seeds of a silent power that would, in time, shock everyone at Fort Redstone. And though the general laughed at her arrival, a small part of him already knew. The silence that would follow might be deafening. The sun climbed higher, scorching the tarmac with a relentless heat that made the scent of metal and dust almost unbearable. Emma Carter found herself in the middle of the drill yard, surrounded by towering soldiers whose muscles rippled under the strain of rigorous exercises. The whistle shrilled sharply, and orders flew like bullets. Push-ups, sprints, obstacle courses, rifle drills. Every activity demanded precision, speed, and endurance. Emma's arms ached immediately. Her body, strong from farm work, had never endured this exact kind of strain. Her legs burned from sprinting with full gear, and her fingers were raw from gripping ropes and climbing walls. Around her, recruits faltered. Some collapsed with exhaustion, gasping and sweating, while others cursed under their breath. Emma gritted her teeth, determined to keep up. Her small victories went unnoticed at first. She climbed walls a little faster than the recruits who had mocked her earlier, adjusted her gear to avoid chafing, and kept her breathing steady while others wheezed. But it was her observation that set her apart. She noticed every misaligned bolt on the obstacle course, every lever pulled incorrectly on the simulation devices, every signal that was misread during tactical exercises. When a training vehicle malfunctioned during a simulated convoy drill, soldiers panicked. The engine wouldn't start and the driver cursed under his breath, frustrated and embarrassed. Emma stepped forward, crouching beside the vehicle. Her hands moved deftly, checking wires and fuel lines. She adjusted a loose connection, replaced a faulty valve, and tapped the engine. With a sudden roar, the vehicle sprang to life. The squad froze, astonished. Even the drill sergeant raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. General Harrison, watching from the sidelines, made a rare note in his notebook, his pen scratching furiously. Emma didn't boast. She wiped her hands and moved on, leaving the group in stunned silence. Her competence spoke louder than any words. But skill alone wasn't enough. Emma had to contend with ridicule, subtle at first, then more pointed. Some soldiers whispered, mocking her farm upbringing. "Did she milk cows before climbing walls?" one jeered. Another added, "I hope she's better at cleaning barns than handling rifles." They didn't know that Emma had spent mornings handling stubborn animals, wielding pitchforks, and repairing tractors that refused to start. Strength, patience, and problem-solving were ingrained in her. She just hadn't needed to prove it to anyone outside her hometown. Still, doubt lingered. The general's laughter at her arrival echoed in her mind, and she knew he was watching, evaluating, measuring her progress. Every mistake she made was magnified in his gaze, every small success barely acknowledged. Emma reminded herself that recognition wasn't her goal, survival and mastery were. She focused on the drills, noting the rhythm of commands, the weaknesses in the formation, and the small adjustments that could save lives in a real scenario. By the third day, her quiet diligence began to stand out. In a tactical simulation involving navigating an unfamiliar terrain, Emma's instincts proved uncanny. While others followed the standard map and instructions, she observed landmarks, wind patterns, and minor terrain variations. When her squad took a wrong turn, She corrected the course, guiding them to their objective faster than any of the other groups. Soldiers glanced at her in surprise, some grudgingly impressed. Even then, General Harrison remained skeptical. He didn't praise her openly. Instead, he studied her closely, noting her calm under pressure, the meticulousness of her movements, the subtle confidence that didn't demand attention. Emma didn't speak unnecessarily, but she asked questions when needed and offered practical solutions during equipment checks. Her mind, honed by years of farm problem-solving, was her greatest weapon. The physical trials continued. Rope climbs, timed sprints, and marksmanship exercises pushed her to the brink. Emma's arms trembled, her lungs burned, and sweat ran in streaks across her face. Yet she endured. She climbed higher than most, sprinted faster than many, and her aim, though initially shaky with recoil, steadily improved. By the end of the week, instructors began to nod at her quietly, acknowledging her progress without words. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, a mechanical drill went wrong. Sparks flew from a misaligned turret and the soldiers nearby froze. Without hesitation, Emma sprinted forward, assessing the situation. Within moments, she had stabilized the equipment, rerouting power, and ensuring safety protocols were in place. General Harrison, who had been observing silently, finally stepped closer, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The other soldiers murmured among themselves. "Maybe she's not just a farm girl," one said. Another nodded, still cautious but intrigued. Emma didn't respond to their whispers. She returned to her routine, adjusting her gear, checking her weapon, and observing the base as carefully as she had since arrival. She had learned that in the military, results mattered more than reputation, and patience often outweighed speed. By the end of the second week, a subtle shift had occurred. Emma's peers, who had once mocked her, now watched her with curiosity and a hint of respect. The general's laughter had been replaced by quiet attention. Yet the biggest tests were still ahead, the real missions, the moments that demanded courage under fire, where the lessons learned in the drill yard would determine life or death. Emma Carter, the farm girl, understood this. Her time at the base was only just beginning, and every detail she had noted, every skill she had honed, was being stored, ready for the moment when it would all matter. She was quiet, observant, underestimated, but already her presence was leaving an invisible mark on Fort Redstone. And though no one knew it yet, the base would soon learn that heroes could arrive in the unlikeliest of forms. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Emma Carter stepped into the briefing room for her first real mission. The walls were adorned with maps, satellite images, and strategic charts, and a sense of tension filled the air. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, whispering and exchanging glances. The mission, a reconnaissance patrol in rugged terrain beyond the base, meant to gather intelligence on potential enemy positions. Simple in description, deadly in practice. Emma felt the familiar pull of anticipation, the same she had felt during drills back at Fort Redstone. Her heart didn't race with fear but with focus. Every step she had taken since arrival, every observation, every problem she had solved had been preparation for this moment. She adjusted the straps on her gear, checked her rifle, and glanced at her squad. Most of them were skeptical. Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl etched across his face, eyed her with disbelief. "Carter, don't get in the way," he muttered. Another soldier whispered, "Bet she trips over that ridge and ruins the whole patrol." Emma didn't reply. She didn't need to. Action, she knew, would speak louder than words. The squad moved out, boots crunching on the rocky soil. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. Emma's eyes scanned the terrain, noting natural cover, uneven paths, and signs of recent activity, footprints partially hidden beneath loose stones, broken branches indicating movement. Most of the squad ignored these subtle signs, trusting only maps and routine patterns. Emma quietly filed everything in her mind. Hours passed as the patrol progressed. The terrain grew rougher, the ridges steeper, and the sun higher. Some soldiers grumbled about the pace, others began to sweat profusely, struggling with the combination of heavy gear and rugged terrain. Emma moved steadily, her body tired but controlled, her senses sharp. She noticed when a soldier's boot snagged a hidden route, when a map reading was slightly off, and when a rock formation could provide unexpected cover if needed. Then came the ambush. Without warning, enemy forces struck from a hidden ridge. Shots rang out, ricocheting off rocks, and the patrol scattered in panic. Soldiers shouted, some falling to the ground, others scrambling for cover. The terrain, which had seemed manageable, became treacherous in chaos. Smoke and dust clouded the air, and the scent of gunpowder stung Emma's nose. Most of the squad froze, unsure how to respond. Sergeant Miller barked orders, but his voice was drowned out by panic. Emma, however, moved instinctively. She dropped low behind a ridge, scanning the enemy positions with precision. Calculating the safest routes, she called out instructions, guiding soldiers toward cover and directing suppressive fire. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, reloading rifles, tossing smoke grenades, and checking the squad's flanks. She coordinated movements with a calm authority that startled her peers. The same farm-born instincts that had taught her to handle livestock, mend broken machinery, and navigate endless fields now allowed her to navigate chaos with clarity. One soldier tripped and fell, exposing himself to fire. Emma was there instantly, pulling him behind cover and shouting instructions. Another vehicle stalled mid-path. She ran to it, diagnosing the engine and restarting it under fire, allowing the team to retreat safely. Every move she made was deliberate, precise, and effective. Minutes felt like hours, but slowly, Emma turned the tide. The ambushers, expecting easy prey, began to falter. Soldiers regained their composure under her guidance. Sergeant Miller, jaw clenched and eyes wide, finally admitted to himself that she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. When the last of the enemy forces retreated, silence fell. The squad huddled, catching their breath, shaken but alive. Emma lowered her rifle, scanning the horizon for any lingering threats. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but her expression was calm, resolute. The soldiers around her looked dazed, realization slowly sinking in. The farm girl had just saved their lives. In the debriefing back at the base, the squad recounted the ambush, emphasizing Emma's quick thinking and bravery. Sergeant Miller, normally curt and critical, offered a reluctant nod of respect. The other soldiers, who had whispered and mocked her days ago, now spoke with cautious admiration. Emma listened quietly, never seeking praise, her focus already shifting to lessons learned, improvements to suggest, and preparations for what might come next. General Harrison observed from a distance. He didn't speak, but his notebook, once filled with casual observations, now contained careful notes, calculations, and questions. He studied Emma with a measured gaze, noting her calm under fire, her strategic mind, and her ability to act decisively when others hesitated. For the first time, he saw what the soldiers were beginning to realize: underestimation could be deadly. Emma Carter returned to her quarters that evening exhausted, her muscles screaming, her mind still running through every action of the mission. She didn't celebrate, she reflected. Each movement, each decision, each tiny advantage she had noticed in the terrain had saved lives. Every lesson she had learned on the farm, observation, patience, improvisation, had become a weapon. And she knew without a shadow of doubt that the mission was just the beginning. The whispers of "she's just a farm girl" had faded among her squad. In its place was a new recognition. Skill, courage, and intelligence could come from anywhere, even from the quiet corners of a small-town farm. And as Emma lay on her cot that night, exhausted but alert, she knew that the real test, the one that would challenge not just skill, but courage under fire, was still ahead. The night had fallen, and Fort Redstone lay under a sky streaked with pale stars, silent except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional clang of metal in the training yards. Most soldiers were exhausted from the day's drills and the reconnaissance mission, settling into routine checks and casual chatter. Emma Carter, however, remained alert. Her farm-born instincts refused to let her rest completely. Even in the calm of night, she could sense the pulse of the base. The hum of machinery, the creak of gates, the subtle shifts in shadows that revealed weaknesses. Earlier, during the mission briefing, intelligence officers had shared reports of potential enemy activity in the surrounding region. Satellite imagery showed unusual troop movements, vehicles disappearing and reappearing in unexpected locations, and communications chatter that suggested reconnaissance had been conducted against the base itself. For most soldiers, the threat seemed distant, almost abstract. But Emma studied the maps with meticulous care, noticing patterns others had dismissed. She traced the likely approach routes the enemy could take, calculating the distances from natural cover to the base perimeter. Her eyes flicked between ridges, valleys, and forest lines. "They'll come from the east," she muttered to herself, noting that the patrols rarely monitored that sector fully at night. She thought about previous drills, recalling the minor gaps she had observed in defensive positioning. Even a single overlooked route could be catastrophic if exploited. Emma moved quietly through the barracks, inspecting equipment and communication lines as she passed. A young recruit, noticing her movement, whispered, "Lieutenant Carter, shouldn't you be resting?" She shook her head, crouching to inspect a faulty radio relay. "Just checking," she said softly. "It only takes one weak link to ruin everything." Meanwhile, the base buzzed with preparation for routine night drills. Soldiers moved vehicles, checked weapons, and practiced maneuvers. General Harrison walked among them, observing and making notes. Emma caught his eye briefly but said nothing. She didn't need recognition. Her focus was on unseen gaps, on what others hadn't considered. Hours passed, and Emma's sense of unease deepened. She noticed minor inconsistencies: a fence post slightly bent, a security camera misaligned, a patrol route shortened without explanation. She marked each one in her mental map, her mind piecing together a picture of the base's vulnerabilities. The intelligence reports, combined with her observations, painted a clear, worrisome image. The base was prepared for drills, but not for a real, coordinated attack. Her concern grew as she spotted a team of soldiers neglecting standard watch rotations, leaving a blind spot in a crucial sector. She approached them quietly. "Move the sensors over a few feet," she instructed. "Check the perimeter again. I don't want surprises." Some grumbled under their breath, but they obeyed, sensing the quiet authority behind her words. The command center, Emma noticed an officer reviewing the same intelligence she had analyzed earlier, unaware of the gaps she had seen firsthand. She stepped forward and pointed out the overlooked approach from the east ridge, explaining how it could be exploited under cover of darkness. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You really think they'll come from there?" she asked skeptically. Emma's eyes were steady. "It's the path they're least expected to take," she said simply. "If we don't reinforce it, they'll walk right in." Despite her warnings, some dismissed her insight as cautious overthinking. General Harrison, ever the skeptic, merely nodded but didn't comment. Yet even he took note of her observations, realizing that her unconventional thinking could hold value in ways the standard military procedures could not. By midnight, Emma had made her rounds multiple times, inspecting gates, turrets, communication lines, and patrol schedules. She made minor adjustments, moving a few soldiers, securing a loose barricade, and double-checking ammunition caches. Each small action added layers of protection to a base that otherwise relied on routine and assumptions. As she paused near the eastern ridge to survey the landscape, Emma's eyes narrowed. Moonlight glinted off the metal of distant vehicles, not base equipment but something unfamiliar: movement. She ducked behind a boulder, scanning carefully. Her heart beat faster, but her breathing remained steady. The enemy could be closer than anyone anticipated. She memorized positions, distances, and potential cover points. Every detail could save lives if an attack occurred tonight. Back in the barracks, soldiers laughed nervously at imagined shadows, unaware of the real threat approaching. Emma's mind raced through contingencies. She ran scenarios silently, predicting how the enemy might respond to alarms, what weak points they could exploit, and how she could counter each move. Her instincts, sharpened by farm work, problem-solving, and observation, now became her battlefield tool. Hours later, Emma returned to her cot, exhausted but alert. Sleep eluded her, replaced by careful planning. She scribbled notes, outlined defensive strategies, and imagined worst-case scenarios. The base was on high alert for minor drills, but the real danger, she knew, would not follow predictable patterns. It would strike from where they least expected, and she was determined to ensure they weren't caught unprepared. As dawn approached, Emma stood at the ridge once more, the first light of morning brushing the horizon. Soldiers began morning routines below, unaware that their base had vulnerabilities that could have been fatal. Emma Carter, quiet and observant, understood that this was only the beginning. The enemy was near, and the first shots of a battle that would test every skill she had were about to be fired. The general's earlier laughter, the dismissive comment about a farm girl, now seemed distant, almost foolish. In her silence and observation, Emma had prepared the base in ways that no one else could see. And when the attack came, the lessons of her past, the patience and resilience cultivated in the fields of Iowa, would become the difference between life and death. The first explosion tore through the pre-dawn calm like a thunderclap. Concrete shook, alarms screamed, and a plume of smoke rose from the eastern ridge. Soldiers bolted upright from their bunks, rifles in hand, eyes wide with panic. The enemy had arrived, and they were faster, smarter, and more coordinated than anyone had anticipated. Emma Carter didn't flinch. Years on a farm had taught her to react calmly under pressure, to act when others panicked. She grabbed her rifle, secured her gear, and sprinted toward the eastern perimeter, where smoke and shadows twisted the familiar landscape into a maze of danger. Her mind cataloged every obstacle, every cover point, every potential threat. Chaos enveloped the base. Soldiers shouted, some aiming at phantom targets, others frozen by fear. Explosions rocked the grounds, sending dirt and debris into the air. Vehicles overturned, alarms blared, and automated turrets fired sporadically. Communication lines crackled with static and confusion, making coordination nearly impossible. Emma moved like a force of nature, her presence commanding attention. "Cover the southern flank. Move that turret to the ridge," she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. Soldiers who had mocked her only days ago blinked in disbelief but quickly followed her orders. Her instructions were precise, her movements confident, and her awareness unflinching. A squad of soldiers attempted to man a damaged artillery post, but panic slowed them. Emma reached them in seconds, assessing the mechanism. "The firing sequence is off by 2 clicks," she said, correcting it with practiced ease. With a roar, the turret came online, tracking enemy movement and opening fire. The soldiers exchanged stunned glances. The farm girl, who had been underestimated, had just turned a potential disaster into an advantage. From her vantage point atop a ridge, Emma spotted the enemy's formation. They were advancing methodically, assuming disorganized resistance, but her quick analysis of the terrain and enemy pattern allowed her to predict their next moves. She relayed instructions to squads across the perimeter, adjusting defensive lines and coordinating suppressive fire. A grenade exploded near a cluster of soldiers, throwing one of them off balance. Emma dove, pulling him behind a concrete barrier, and shouted reassurances. "Stay low, watch the ridge." Her calm under fire spread to those around her. Fear still lingered, but competence became contagious. Soldiers began moving with purpose, following her example. The enemy adapted, sending a fast-moving unit to flank the base. Emma saw it immediately. Without hesitation, she grabbed a radio, calling out positions and assigning intercept squads. Then, noticing a broken barricade that could allow enemy infiltration, she sprinted to reinforce it herself, stacking sandbags and guiding 2 soldiers to plug gaps. Minutes stretched like hours, but her energy didn't waver. General Harrison watched silently from the command post, jaw clenched. The laughter that had greeted her arrival seemed absurd now. The farm girl was orchestrating defense with unmatched clarity, turning a chaotic, potentially deadly attack into a coordinated resistance. His notebook, once filled with casual remarks, now contained careful observations of her actions, movements, and instincts. Emma noticed another threat, a damaged power line feeding the automated defense system. If it failed, turrets would shut down, leaving a critical sector exposed. She dashed toward the malfunctioning line, dodging incoming fire. Sparks flew as she twisted connectors and rerouted power manually. Her fingers burned from contact with live wires, but she ignored it. Seconds later, the defense systems roared back to life, targeting advancing enemy units and halting their momentum. Through it all, Emma maintained a mental map of every soldier, every turret, every enemy position. She called out positions, redirected fire, and improvised strategies in real time. The chaos of battle, which had paralyzed most, became her domain. She acted decisively, with precision honed from years of practical problem-solving on the farm, where patience, observation, and quick thinking had been survival skills. The enemy, initially confident in their surprise attack, began to falter. Their formation broke as Emma's improvisations disrupted their advance. Soldiers, inspired by her courage, fought back with renewed energy. Even Sergeant Miller, who had once doubted her, shouted orders, mirroring her tactics. Emma had become the heartbeat of the base's defense, a calm center amid the storm. Minutes later, a lull fell over the battlefield. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the acrid scent of gunpowder stung everyone's nostrils. Emma lowered her rifle, scanning the perimeter. Soldiers, though battered and exhausted, held their positions. The enemy had been pushed back, their initial advantage squandered. Emma's actions had prevented catastrophic losses and bought the base precious time. The base, once in chaos, now moved with cautious order. Soldiers checked equipment, tended to the wounded, and reinforced defenses. Whispers began to spread. "She's amazing. I can't believe she did all that. The farm girl saved us." Emma didn't seek acknowledgement. She simply continued moving, securing positions, and ensuring that no threat remained unnoticed. General Harrison finally stepped forward, walking across the ridge to meet her. His face was grim, but his eyes held something new: respect. No words were spoken yet, but the silence between them carried weight. The laughter that had greeted her arrival was gone, replaced by recognition of her skill, courage, and composure. Emma Carter, quiet, unassuming, and underestimated, had turned a night of potential disaster into a victory. The base remained standing, the soldiers alive, and the enemy repelled. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. The threats were far from over, and Fort Redstone would need every ounce of vigilance, strategy, and courage to survive the coming days. In the smoky aftermath, as soldiers caught their breath and tended to the wounded, a quiet realization spread. This farm girl, whom everyone had doubted, had become the reason Fort Redstone survived. And when the sun finally broke over the horizon, illuminating the scarred landscape, Emma stood resolute, already planning the next steps, already thinking ahead to the battles that were still to come. The smoke hung thick over Fort Redstone, mingling with the acrid scent of spent gunpowder and burning vehicles. Soldiers moved cautiously through the cratered landscape, patching defensive lines and checking for stragglers. Most were exhausted, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Emma Carter's heart, however, beat with a different rhythm: observation, calculation, anticipation. The battle was far from over. From her vantage point atop a ridge, Emma scanned the enemy forces. The attackers, once confident in their ambush, were now scattered and disorganized, yet still dangerous. She noticed patterns in their movement. One flank consistently overextended, relying on speed rather than cover, while another unit lagged, overconfident and exposed. Most soldiers would see only chaos. Emma saw opportunity. She pulled a map from her pack and quickly sketched out her observations. Then she moved, sprinting down to a communication hub, connecting with squads across the perimeter. Her voice was calm, yet firm. "We've identified their weak points. Split into teams. Intercept the eastern flank and create a funnel toward the ridge. Cover the southern approach and stay alert for stragglers. Follow my lead and don't improvise, unless you need to survive." The soldiers froze for a heartbeat. Could the farm girl, underestimated for weeks, really be orchestrating a counterattack? Yet the logic of her plan was undeniable. One by one, squads began moving with purpose, guided by her precise commands. She had turned confusion into strategy. Emma's eyes caught another threat, a small enemy unit attempting to sneak around the base's western edge. Without hesitation, she grabbed a radio and directed a nearby squad to intercept, timing their arrival with her own squad's maneuvers. Her mind raced with calculations, timing, distances, lines of fire, all executed instinctively, like a chess master predicting moves several steps ahead. Moments later, the eastern flank came into view. Emma crouched behind a pile of rubble, binoculars raised, tracking enemy vehicles and foot soldiers as they moved predictably toward the ridge. She signaled to the turret operators, ensuring suppressive fire covered the exposed approach. One misstep from the enemy would leave them vulnerable to concentrated fire. Then she moved. Sprinting across open ground under fire, Emma guided soldiers into positions that seemed counterintuitive but were deadly in execution. Using debris, shadows, and elevation, she created kill zones where enemy units became easy targets. Soldiers followed, awed by her confidence and precision. Fear had transformed into controlled aggression, all under her calm direction. Explosions erupted as the first enemy vehicles hit the traps. The ridge shook with the impact of fire and shell fragments. Emma's voice rang out, coordinating turrets and guiding foot soldiers to advantageous positions. One enemy unit attempted to regroup and counterattack, but Emma anticipated their moves, sending another squad to intercept before they could reach the base. Even Sergeant Miller, who had doubted her earlier, barked orders now in sync with her commands. He threw her a glance, the weight of realization heavy on his face. This farm girl, who had once seemed out of place in the military, was now the central force controlling the battlefield. From the ridge, Emma noticed a critical vulnerability. The enemy's command vehicle was exposed near a ridge, unprotected because their troops had overextended in pursuit. She quickly calculated the risk, then relayed instructions for a small strike team to disable it. "Move quickly, stay low, aim for the engine and communications," she directed. Within seconds, the vehicle erupted in a controlled explosion, sending the enemy scrambling in disarray. The impact of the strike rippled across the battlefield. Enemy units that had been coordinated were now scattered, their morale shaken. Soldiers at Fort Redstone gained confidence, pressing their advantage, following Emma's commands with a mixture of awe and relief. What had been a precarious defense became a structured counterattack, turning the tide in favor of the base. General Harrison watched from the command post, jaw tight, eyes wide. The notebook he had kept for weeks, recording her actions and observations, was now filled with meticulous notes of strategy, timing, and results. The laughter that had greeted her arrival was long gone. She wasn't just competent, she was brilliant under pressure, the unseen hand controlling the chaos. Emma moved tirelessly, coordinating, observing, and executing. She ran across the battlefield, rerouting teams, repairing damaged defenses, and predicting enemy maneuvers. Her small stature and quiet demeanor masked the intensity of her presence. Every movement had purpose, every command had precision. Her intuition, honed by years of solving problems on a farm, translated seamlessly into battlefield strategy. By mid-morning, the enemy's retreat became apparent. What had started as a potential disaster was now a base holding firm, soldiers confident and the attackers disorganized. Emma lowered her rifle, breathing steadily, scanning for any remaining threats. The battlefield, once a chaotic storm of fire and smoke, had been transformed into a controlled, secure perimeter. Soldiers began murmuring among themselves, awe and respect evident in their voices. "Did you see how she predicted their moves?" one whispered. "I can't believe a farm girl did this," another said. Even hardened veterans, previously skeptical, nodded silently, acknowledging her skill without words. Emma's calm, quiet presence remained unchanged. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she moved to check communications, repaired minor damages, and ensured every position was secure. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, anticipating the next potential threat, already planning contingencies. The battle had been won, but she knew vigilance remained crucial. And in that moment, the base realized a truth they hadn't expected. Courage, intelligence, and leadership were not measured by background, size, or experience. They were revealed in action, in composure under pressure, and in the ability to see what others could not. For Fort Redstone, Emma Carter had become more than a soldier. She was a strategist, a leader, and most importantly, a hero whose actions had turned chaos into order. The tide of battle had shifted, and it bore her unmistakable mark. The battlefield was eerily quiet now. Smoke drifted in pale, curling tendrils across the scarred landscape, and the acrid scent of gunpowder hung thick in the air. Broken vehicles and craters dotted the ground, reminders of the chaos that had erupted only hours before. But despite the destruction, Fort Redstone remained standing. Soldiers moved cautiously, checking positions, tending to the wounded, and surveying the remnants of the enemy assault. Emma Carter lowered her rifle, muscles tense but steady, eyes scanning every ridge, every shadow, every potential threat. Her mind was still calculating, still planning, but for the first time that day, there was a pause, a momentary silence in which the full scale of what had happened began to settle over the base. Around her, soldiers were frozen, not from fear but from disbelief. They looked at one another, then at Emma, and slowly realized that it was she who had orchestrated the defense. Every maneuver, every strategy, every critical action that had kept them alive had been hers. They had watched her move with calm precision through explosions, gunfire, and chaos. And now, the battlefield lay quiet because of her. Sergeant Miller, normally gruff and sharp-tongued, approached first. His boots crunched on loose gravel, but he did not speak at first. He simply looked at her, a mix of awe, respect, and disbelief etched on his weathered face. I didn't know you had it in you," he muttered, almost to himself. Emma only nodded, her face composed, letting the words settle without responding. Other soldiers began emerging from cover, their eyes wide, hands still shaking. She saved us," one whispered. Another muttered, "I can't believe she saw everything, predicted it all." The murmurs grew into whispers, and then into quiet conversations, all acknowledging the one person who had held the base together when chaos had threatened to destroy it. General Harrison approached, moving slowly through the debris-strewn yard. His boots, heavy and measured, echoed across the quiet battlefield. He paused a few feet from Emma, studying her with a gaze that had shifted from skepticism to awe. The notebook he had carried for weeks now lay closed at his side. No words had left his mouth, yet his expression spoke volumes. He had underestimated her, and he would never do so again. Finally he spoke, his voice low but resonant, carrying over the silent base. "Lieutenant Carter, your actions saved this base. You've earned the respect of every soldier here, myself included." The silence of the base seemed to amplify his words. Emma met his gaze, nodding respectfully. She didn't boast or seek praise. Her reward was in knowing the base and her fellow soldiers had survived. Around them, soldiers began to gather. Eyes that had once doubted her now shone with admiration. Some clapped hesitantly at first, then louder, the sound growing until it echoed across the yard. Laughter and disbelief mingled with cheers as soldiers celebrated survival and heroism. Emma remained calm, yet inside, a small smile tugged at her lips. She had never sought recognition, but seeing the relief, respect, and gratitude of her squad stirred something deep within her. She thought of her farm in Iowa, of mornings spent before sunrise, tending animals, fixing broken tractors, and solving problems with no one to guide her. Those long, quiet hours of hard work had taught her patience, observation, and ingenuity. Skills that had seemed ordinary back home had now become weapons, and courage she hadn't realized she possessed had been forged in fire. She had brought all of it to Fort Redstone, and it had made the difference between life and death. A young recruit approached her, trembling slightly. "Lieutenant Carter, I didn't believe it at first, but thank you, you kept us alive." Emma placed a reassuring hand on the soldier's shoulder. "We all survived because we worked together. You stayed calm, you followed directions, and you did your part. That's what matters." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience and authority. Even the wounded were being attended to, soldiers helping one another as medics worked tirelessly. Emma moved through the crowd, checking positions, giving small instructions, and ensuring no one was left vulnerable. Though the battle had been won, vigilance remained essential. She had learned long ago that victory required attention, even when it seemed complete. General Harrison finally stepped closer, standing beside her. "I laughed at your arrival," he admitted quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. I thought a farm girl couldn't handle this world. I was wrong." Emma met his gaze, the faintest smile forming on her face. "Experience isn't always what it seems," she said simply. "Sometimes it's about what you've learned in life, not just in books or training." The base slowly returned to routine. Soldiers organized, patrols resumed, and the wounded were treated. Yet the mood had shifted permanently. The laughter and whispers about the farm girl were replaced with respect, acknowledgement, and for some, awe. Emma's calm, composure, and skill under fire had rewritten every expectation. And in the quiet moments, as the smoke cleared and sunlight began to illuminate the yard, Emma allowed herself a brief pause. She looked across the base, the ridges, the barricades, the repaired vehicles, and felt a profound sense of purpose. She had arrived underestimated, laughed at, and doubted, and now she had become the reason the base survived. Fort Redstone had learned a lesson they would not forget. Heroism comes in unexpected forms, and courage cannot be measured by background, appearance, or size. Emma Carter, the quiet farm girl, had proved that extraordinary strength often hides in the most ordinary of places. The base fell silent again, not in fear, not in panic, but in awe. Every soldier, every officer, every veteran understood the truth. Their survival that day had rested in the hands of one person they had underestimated. And those hands had delivered victory, strategy, and calm where others had found only chaos. Emma stood at the center of that silence, surveying the aftermath, already thinking ahead. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Fort Redstone was alive because of her. And though no one had believed it at first, they all now understood. This farm girl was no ordinary soldier. The echoes of gunfire had faded, leaving only the soft rustle of wind and the occasional murmur of gratitude. But the lesson remained. The underestimated can become the strongest, the quietest can become the most decisive, and heroes often arrive in forms no one anticipates. Fort Redstone had fallen silent, but in that silence, Emma Carter's name resounded louder than any gunshot. The morning sun bathed Fort Redstone in a soft, golden light, illuminating the scars of battle left from the previous night. The base had survived the attack, but the memory of chaos lingered in every corner: burned-out vehicles, scorched earth, and soldiers still tending to minor injuries. Despite the aftermath, there was a sense of calm, as if the base itself had exhaled for the first time since the enemy struck. Emma Carter stood at attention outside the command center, her uniform streaked with dust and grime, her boots scuffed from hours of running across the battlefield. Around her, soldiers moved with a new sense of purpose, glances cast toward her in admiration. Even those who had doubted her skill now looked on with respect, their whispers of farm girl replaced with something far heavier: leader, strategist, hero. General Harrison stepped forward, the weight of authority in his posture unmistakable. His eyes scanned the assembled soldiers before settling on Emma. For weeks he had questioned her capabilities, laughing at her rural background, underestimating the quiet girl from Iowa. But now, in the light of her actions, the laughter was gone. In its place was acknowledgement, admiration, and a recognition that she had saved the base. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled troops, "you arrived here underestimated. Many thought your skills, honed on a farm, could never translate to this battlefield. I, too, was guilty of that assumption." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Soldiers leaned in, sensing the significance of what he was about to say. You have shown courage, intelligence, and leadership beyond what anyone expected. Your calm under fire, your ability to observe, analyze, and act decisively has saved lives and held Fort Redstone when it mattered most. Today, you earn not only my respect but the respect of every soldier on this base. You are a hero. A ripple of applause spread across the assembled soldiers, hesitant at first, then growing into a full, sustained acknowledgement. Some clapped vigorously, others stood silently, heads bowed in quiet respect. Emma, ever composed, allowed herself a small, appreciative nod. She did not speak. Her actions had always spoken louder than words. Soldiers approached her one by one, offering handshakes, pats on the shoulder, and grateful smiles. Sergeant Miller, usually gruff and curt, stood before her, visibly moved. "I should have seen it earlier," he admitted quietly. "I judged too fast. You saved us all." Emma smiled faintly. "We all did our part," she replied. "But it helps to know someone notices the details that matter." Even recruits who had mocked her arrival now hung on her every word, eyes wide with admiration. "Lieutenant Carter, how did you know what to do?" one asked. Emma crouched slightly to meet the young soldier's gaze. "I watched, I listened, I learned," she said softly. "The base, the terrain, the soldiers around you, everything tells a story if you pay attention." Her words resonated not as lectures, but as wisdom earned through experience, risk, and courage. Later, Emma walked through the base, observing the repairs, the reorganized defenses, and the soldiers now moving with confidence rather than fear. Each step reminded her of the path that had led her here. From the farm in Iowa, where she had learned the value of patience, observation, and problem-solving, to Fort Redstone, where those very skills had become instruments of survival and leadership. She reflected on how underestimated she had been, laughed at, dismissed, and doubted, and how every small, quiet skill she had honed had proved indispensable. She paused near the ridge where the enemy had first struck, now cleared of smoke and debris. The sun glinted off the repaired turrets and the soldiers moving in disciplined patrols. For a moment, she allowed herself to absorb the magnitude of the day. Lives had been saved. Chaos had been controlled. The base stood because she had acted decisively, thought strategically, and never doubted herself, even when others did. General Harrison approached her again, this time more relaxed, yet carrying an unmistakable sense of admiration. "You've changed this base," he said quietly. "Not just with your actions last night, but with the way you've earned the trust and respect of every soldier here. You've shown us that courage comes in many forms, even from a farm girl." Emma chuckled softly, a small sound of quiet satisfaction. "Courage isn't about where you come from," she said. "It's about what you do when it matters most." In the following days, Fort Redstone adjusted to life after the attack. Soldiers trained harder, patrols were more disciplined, and defensive procedures were updated based on Emma's observations and recommendations. She continued to lead quietly, never seeking accolades, always focusing on preparation, observation, and the safety of her comrades. But the base had changed. A subtle shift had occurred, a recognition that heroes could arrive unexpectedly, and that calm intelligence under pressure was as valuable as brute strength. Emma often found herself looking out over the ridges, thinking of her farm, the quiet mornings, and the lessons learned in tending animals, fixing machinery, and solving problems alone. Those simple, ordinary experiences had forged a resilience and perspective that now defined her. The farm girl who had once been underestimated had become the heart of Fort Redstone's defense, and the soldiers who had doubted her now relied on her judgment, instinct, and leadership. And though the battles ahead would surely test them all again, the base understood a truth they would never forget. Courage, skill, and leadership can come from unexpected places. Emma Carter's story was proof. As the sun rose fully over the base, bathing Fort Redstone in light, Emma stood on the ridge, surveying the sprawling complex. Soldiers moved confidently through the yard, vehicles and defenses repaired, and the hum of life returning. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. The general approached once more, this time silently. He stopped beside her, looking out over the base. Neither spoke for a long moment. The silence was not tense but full of recognition, of understanding, of respect earned through action. Finally, he nodded. Emma nodded back. Words weren't necessary. The moment was complete. The farm girl had arrived underestimated, laughed at, doubted, and now she had become a hero. Fort Redstone had survived, lives had been saved, and in that victory a quiet truth resounded. Extraordinary courage often hides in ordinary places, and heroes often come in unexpected forms. Emma Carter, once just a farm girl, now stood as a symbol of skill, courage, and leadership, her story written into the legacy of Fort Redstone. And though the battles would continue, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready.